Nobody wants Grandma's designs anymore, Kenneth said with a smug chuckle, his voice echoing through the glass-walled conference room. We need fresh blood on the innovation team, not outdated concepts from the 80s. I sat there, my hands folded in my lap, watching 25 years of dedication crumble in front of my colleagues. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows of Bright Hollow Labs' downtown Phoenix office, casting long shadows across the polished table where my career was being dissected like a failed blueprint. My name is Eliza Freeman. I'm 56 years old, and I've been designing sustainable architecture since before it was trendy. For over 2 decades, I've poured my heart into this firm, creating innovative green buildings that balanced functionality with environmental responsibility. I've won awards, mentored young architects, and helped establish Bright Hollow Labs as a leader in sustainable design. But today, none of that seemed to matter. Your aesthetic has become... Kenneth paused, searching for the right words while adjusting his expensive watch. Dated. The market wants sleek, modern designs that speak to younger demographics. Your work feels too traditional, too rooted in the past. The other partners nodded in agreement, their faces a mixture of false sympathy and relief that they weren't in my position. I could see how they'd already made up their minds before I'd even walked into the room. This wasn't a discussion, it was an execution. Effective immediately, you'll be transitioning off the innovation team, Kenneth continued, sliding a folder across the table toward me. We're restructuring to focus on more contemporary approaches to sustainable design. You'll be reassigned to our restoration division, working on historical preservation projects. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were relegating me to fixing old buildings while dismissing the very experience that had taught me how to create lasting, beautiful structures. I thought about all the late nights I'd spent perfecting designs, all the client meetings where I'd fought for sustainable materials when they were expensive and unpopular, all the young architects I'd trained who were now sitting silently around this table. I understand, I said quietly, my voice steadier than I felt. When does this transition take effect? Next Monday, Kenneth replied, already shuffling through other papers. Harrison will take over your current projects. We'll make sure the clients are informed of the change. As I gathered my things and walked toward the door, I caught a glimpse of my latest project sketches still pinned to the presentation board. Designs for an innovative, eco-friendly housing complex that combined solar technology with natural ventilation systems. Little did Kenneth know, those dated concepts were about to prove him very wrong. Walking back to my office, I tried to process what had just happened. The hallways of Bright Hollow Labs felt different now, less like home and more like a place where I was merely tolerated. I'd spent so many years here that I could navigate these corridors with my eyes closed, but now everything seemed foreign. I'd joined the firm straight out of graduate school, back when sustainable architecture was considered a niche specialty rather than an industry standard. My mentor, Patricia Holloway, had founded the company with the vision of creating buildings that worked in harmony with their environment. She'd retired 5 years ago, selling her shares to the current partnership, and with her went the soul of the company I'd helped build. Kenneth Morrison had been climbing the corporate ladder ever since, bringing with him a focus on profits over principles. He favored flashy designs that looked good in architectural magazines, but often sacrificed long-term sustainability for immediate visual impact. His idea of innovation was installing smart home technology in otherwise conventional buildings and calling them revolutionary. I thought about my daughter Claire, who lived in Seattle with her 2 children. She'd often asked me why I stayed at a firm that seemed to undervalue my contributions. "Mom, you could start your own practice," she'd say during our weekly video calls. "You have the experience and the reputation." But Bright Hollow Labs had been my professional identity for so long that I couldn't imagine working anywhere else. As I reached my office, I noticed the photos on my desk, images of buildings I'd designed over the years. There was the community center in Tucson that had won a state sustainability award, the elementary school in Tempe that had reduced its energy consumption by 60%, and the affordable housing project in Mesa that had become a model for other cities. Each project represented not just a building, but a piece of my professional soul. My computer chimed with an email notification. It was from the Phoenix Green Housing Initiative, marked with high importance. I'd submitted my independent design proposal 3 months ago, working on it during evenings and weekends in my home studio. The city had announced a competition for sustainable, affordable housing concepts, and I'd decided to enter under my own name rather than through the firm. The email was brief but promising. They wanted to schedule a presentation meeting for the following week. My heart began to race as I realized that while Kenneth was pushing me toward the exit, my own work might be opening an entirely different door. I quickly responded, confirming my availability, then sat back in my chair with the first genuine smile I'd felt all day. The weekend passed in a blur of mixed emotions. I found myself oscillating between anger at Kenneth's dismissive treatment and excitement about the upcoming presentation with the city. Saturday morning, I spread my competition designs across my dining room table, reviewing every detail with fresh eyes. My concept centered around modular sustainable housing units that could be adapted to different family sizes and lot configurations. The design incorporated passive solar heating, rainwater collection systems, and rooftop gardens that residents could use for growing food. The aesthetic was clean and modern, but grounded in practical functionality, what Kenneth would probably call grandma's designs, but what I knew was simply good architecture. Sunday afternoon, Claire called for our weekly check-in. "You sound different, Mom," she said after I'd told her about being removed from the innovation team. "I was expecting you to be more upset." "I am upset," I admitted, walking around my home office where I'd spent countless hours on personal projects. "But I'm also feeling something I haven't felt in years: freedom. For the first time, I'm working on something that's entirely mine." "Tell me about this city project," she said, and I could hear genuine interest in her voice. I explained my housing design concept, how it could provide affordable, sustainable homes while creating a sense of community through shared green spaces and energy systems. As I spoke, I realized how passionate I still felt about my work, despite the firm's attempt to make me feel obsolete. "Mom, this sounds incredible," Claire said. "When is your presentation?" "Tuesday afternoon. I've been refining the proposal all weekend." I paused, looking at the drawings spread across my desk. The funny thing is, this design incorporates everything I've learned over 25 years. It's not dated. It's evolved. Monday morning arrived with an email from Harrison, the young architect who would be taking over my projects. He wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss the transition. I agreed, though I found it ironic that someone half my age with a fraction of my experience was considered more innovative, simply because he preferred glass and steel over natural materials. The meeting was professional but awkward. Harrison clearly felt uncomfortable about the situation, and I didn't want to make it harder for him. He was talented, just inexperienced, and none of this was his fault. "I've reviewed your current projects," he said, spreading files across the conference table. "Your work is really impressive. I hope I can maintain the same level of quality." "You will," I assured him. "Just remember that sustainable design isn't about following trends. It's about creating buildings that will serve people well for decades." As I handed over my project files, I felt a strange sense of closure. These buildings would be completed by someone else, but they represented my past. Tuesday's presentation would determine my future. Tuesday morning, I arrived at the office early to finish clearing out my workspace from the innovation team area. The building felt quieter than usual, with most staff not arriving until 8 a.m. I'd always been an early riser, preferring the peaceful hours before the day's chaos began. Kenneth walked by my former desk as I was packing the last of my personal items. "How's the transition going, Eliza?" he asked, his tone suggesting he was asking out of obligation rather than genuine concern. "Smoothly," I replied, not looking up from the box I was filling. "I'll be completely moved to the restoration department by this afternoon." Good, he said, then paused. "I hope you understand that this decision wasn't personal. It's just business. The firm needs to stay competitive." I finally looked up at him. This man who'd spent the last 5 years systematically undermining everything Patricia Holloway had built. I understand completely, Kenneth. Sometimes change is exactly what's needed. He seemed satisfied with my response and continued toward his corner office. What he didn't know was that in 3 hours, I'd be presenting to the Phoenix Green Housing Initiative Committee, potentially launching a new chapter of my career that would make his definition of competitive look extremely narrow. At 1 p.m., I left the office for my presentation, telling my assistant I had a dentist appointment. The Phoenix City Hall was a 15-minute drive from Bright Hollow Labs, and I used the time to review my talking points one final time. My hands were steadier than I'd expected. Apparently, years of client presentations had prepared me for this moment. The committee meeting room was smaller than I'd anticipated, with 5 members seated around a rectangular table. Dr. Angela Rodriguez, the city's Director of Sustainable Development, led the introductions. The other members included a city planner, a housing advocate, an environmental engineer, and a community representative. Ms. Freeman, Dr. Rodriguez began, we've reviewed your preliminary submission, and we're quite impressed. Your modular approach to sustainable housing addresses several key challenges we're facing in Phoenix. Could you walk us through your concept in more detail? For the next 30 minutes, I presented my design with a passion I hadn't felt in years. I explained how the modular units could be manufactured off-site to reduce construction waste, how the passive solar design would minimize energy costs for residents, and how the integrated community gardens would provide both food security and social connection. The beauty of this system, I said, pointing to my technical drawings, is its adaptability. A young couple might start with a 1-bedroom unit, then add modules as their family grows. Empty nesters could downsize by removing sections, which could then be used for other families. The environmental engineer leaned forward. What about maintenance costs? These systems look complex. Actually, they're designed for simplicity, I replied. The solar panels and rainwater systems use proven technology with minimal moving parts. The construction materials are chosen for durability and low maintenance. Over a 20-year period, residents would save significantly on utility costs. The questions continued for another 20 minutes, each one allowing me to demonstrate the depth of thought I'd put into every aspect of the design. These weren't just pretty drawings. This was a comprehensive solution to urban housing challenges. Ms. Freeman, Dr. Rodriguez said as the session concluded, we have 3 more presentations this week, but I can tell you that your proposal addresses our requirements exceptionally well. We'll be making our final decision by Friday and announcing the winner next Monday. As I drove back to Bright Hollow Labs, I felt a mixture of hope and nervous energy. Whether or not I won the competition, I'd reminded myself that my designs weren't dated. They were timeless, practical, and innovative in ways that mattered beyond aesthetic trends. The rest of the week crawled by at an agonizing pace. I threw myself into my new role in the restoration department, reviewing historical preservation guidelines and studying architectural drawings from the 1920s and 1930s. The irony wasn't lost on me. While Kenneth dismissed my work as dated, I was now officially responsible for maintaining buildings from nearly a century ago. Thursday afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor. Harrison knocked on my new office door, looking uncertain. Eliza, do you have a minute? I'm running into some issues with the Scottsdale project. I gestured for him to sit down. The Scottsdale project had been my baby, a mixed-use development that combined residential units with retail space and office areas, all designed around a central courtyard with native desert landscaping. The client is asking for modifications to the ventilation system, Harrison continued. They want to add more mechanical cooling, but I'm not sure how that affects your sustainability calculations. I pulled out my original notes for the project. The natural ventilation system was designed to work with the building's orientation and the thermal mass of the adobe walls. If you add conventional air conditioning, you'll need to recalculate the energy load for the entire building. We spent the next hour going through the technical details. Harrison was bright and eager to learn, but he lacked the experience to understand how changing one element of a sustainable design could affect the entire system. As we worked, I realized how much institutional knowledge was walking out the door with my demotion. "You know," Harrison said as we finished, "I've been looking at your other projects. Your approach to sustainable design is really sophisticated. I don't understand why." He trailed off, clearly uncomfortable, criticizing the partners. Why I was moved off the innovation team. I finished for him. Sometimes experience is seen as a liability rather than an asset. Friday morning brought an email that made my heart skip. Dr. Rodriguez wanted to schedule a follow-up call for 2 p.m. The subject line read, "Phoenix Green Housing Initiative, Next Steps." I tried not to read too much into the phrasing, but next steps sounded promising. The call lasted only 10 minutes, but they were the most important 10 minutes of my professional life. "Ms. Freeman, I'm pleased to inform you that the committee has selected your modular sustainable housing design as the winner of our competition. Your proposal scored highest in every category we evaluated: innovation, sustainability, cost-effectiveness, and community impact." I sat in stunned silence for a moment, then managed to say, "Thank you. I'm honored and excited to move forward." "The formal announcement will be made Monday morning at 10 a.m., Dr. Rodriguez continued. "We'll be holding a press conference at City Hall, and we'd like you to be present to answer questions about the design. This is a significant initiative for Phoenix. We're planning to build the first phase of 200 units within 18 months. After the call ended, I sat in my office, processing what had just happened. In the span of 1 week, I'd gone from being dismissed as irrelevant to winning the most significant housing competition in the city's history. My dated aesthetic had just been selected to house thousands of Phoenix residents in innovative, sustainable homes. I thought about calling Claire immediately, but decided to wait until after the public announcement. There was something satisfying about keeping this victory private for a few more days, especially while Kenneth continued to restructure the innovation team around more contemporary approaches. Looking at my calendar, I realized that Monday's press conference would occur during the weekly staff meeting at Bright Hollow Labs. I wondered if anyone would be watching the local news. Monday morning arrived with unusual warmth for October in Phoenix. I'd spent the weekend preparing for the press conference, reviewing my design details and anticipating questions from reporters. The weight of the moment was starting to sink in. This wasn't just a professional victory. It was validation of everything I'd spent my career working toward. I arrived at City Hall 30 minutes early, wanting time to compose myself before facing the cameras. Dr. Rodriguez met me in her office, along with Mayor Patricia Thompson and several other city officials. "Ms. Freeman, before we begin, I want you to know how impressed we were with your presentation," Mayor Thompson said. "This housing initiative represents the future of sustainable urban development, and your design will serve as a model for other cities across the Southwest." The press conference was held in the main lobby of City Hall, with local television stations, newspaper reporters, and representatives from architectural publications in attendance. As I stood at the podium beside the mayor, I thought about all the late nights I'd spent working on this design in my home studio, never imagining it would lead to this moment. Today, we're proud to announce the winner of Phoenix's Green Housing Initiative, Mayor Thompson began. After reviewing proposals from firms across the region, we've selected an innovative modular design that will provide affordable, sustainable housing while creating vibrant communities for our residents. She turned to me, and I stepped forward to address the audience. This design represents 25 years of learning how to create buildings that serve both people and the environment, I began. These homes will use 60% less energy than conventional housing while providing residents with gardens, community spaces, and the flexibility to adapt their living spaces as their needs change. The questions from reporters were thoughtful and detailed. A journalist from the Arizona Republic asked about construction timelines, while a representative from Architectural Digest wanted to know how the design addressed Phoenix's unique climate challenges. With each answer, I felt my confidence growing. "Miss Freeman," a reporter from Channel 12 asked, "I understand you're an architect with Bright Hollow Labs. How does your firm feel about this selection?" I paused, choosing my words carefully. This was an independent submission, I developed this design on my own time, using my personal experience and vision for sustainable housing. As the press conference concluded, I noticed several familiar faces in the crowd. Word had apparently spread quickly through Phoenix's architectural community. I saw colleagues from other firms, former clients, and even a few current Bright Hollow Labs employees who had obviously left work to attend. My phone buzzed with a text from Claire. "Mom, I just saw the news online. I'm so proud of you." Her message was followed by a string of celebration emojis. The drive back to Bright Hollow Labs felt surreal. I'd just been announced as the winner of the city's most significant housing competition, but I still had to return to my desk in the restoration department and pretend this was just another Monday. As I walked through the office lobby, I could feel eyes following me. The news had clearly reached the firm. Janet, the receptionist, gave me a knowing smile and a thumbs up. Several junior architects stopped their conversations to congratulate me. I made it to my office without encountering Kenneth, but I knew that conversation was inevitable. My phone was already buzzing with calls from reporters wanting follow-up interviews, and my email inbox was filling with congratulatory messages from colleagues across the industry. By noon, it was clear that my dated aesthetic had just become the most talked-about architectural design in Phoenix. The irony was delicious, but I wasn't finished yet. Kenneth appeared in my office doorway at 1 p.m., his expression a careful mask of professionalism that couldn't quite hide his frustration. "Eliza, congratulations on your competition win," he said, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. "Quite an achievement." "Thank you," I replied, not looking up from the historical preservation documents I was reviewing. "I'm pleased the city appreciated the design." "I'm curious," he continued, settling into the chair across from my desk. "When exactly did you develop this proposal? I don't recall seeing any modular housing concepts in your recent project portfolio." I set down my pen and met his gaze directly. "I worked on it during my personal time, using my home studio. The design process took about 6 months, primarily evenings and weekends." Kenneth's jaw tightened slightly. "I see. And you didn't think to discuss this with the firm? After all, Bright Hollow Labs has been your professional home for 25 years. The competition guidelines were clear that submissions could come from individual architects or firms," I said calmly. "I chose to submit as an individual." "But surely you understand the optics here," Kenneth pressed. "You're a Bright Hollow Labs employee winning a major city contract just days after being restructured within the firm. It could appear that we don't recognize our own talent." I almost laughed at his audacity. "The competition was announced 4 months ago, Kenneth. The submission deadline was 3 months ago. The judging process has been ongoing for weeks. None of this happened just days after anything." He stood up, his composure finally cracking. "The partners and I need to discuss how to handle this situation. The press is already calling for statements about our role in the project." "I'll save you the trouble," I said, returning to my documents. "I'll be handling all media inquiries personally." By Tuesday morning, the story had gained momentum beyond what anyone anticipated. The Phoenix Business Journal ran a front-page feature titled, "Local Architect's Independent Design Wins City Housing Competition," with a sidebar article analyzing the growing trend of sustainable architecture in the Southwest. More significantly, Architectural Review, the industry's most prestigious publication, had picked up the story. Their online article, Innovation from Experience: How 25 Years of Practice Led to Award-Winning Design, included a detailed analysis of my modular housing concept and interviews with sustainable design experts praising the approach. Kenneth called an emergency partners meeting for Tuesday afternoon. I learned about it from Harrison, who'd been asked to compile all materials related to my previous projects for the firm. "They want to see everything you worked on for the past 2 years," he told me, looking uncomfortable. "Kenneth specifically mentioned reviewing your project documentation for any connection to the winning design." I almost felt sorry for them. They were scrambling to find some way to claim partial credit for my success, not understanding that this design represented a completely different philosophy from anything Bright Hollow Labs had pursued under Kenneth's leadership. Wednesday brought the phone call I'd been expecting. It was Kenneth, his voice strained with forced enthusiasm. "Eliza, the partners have been discussing your recent success, and we'd like to propose a solution that benefits everyone. We're prepared to offer you reinstatement to the innovation team as lead sustainable design architect. We'd also like to discuss how Bright Hollow Labs might serve as the implementing firm for your housing project." I let the silence stretch for several seconds before responding. "I appreciate the offer, Kenneth, but I'm quite content in my current role. As for the implementation, I'll be working directly with the city's selected construction partners." His sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. "Eliza, surely you can see the mutual benefit here. The firm's resources, our established relationships with contractors. The city has already selected their preferred partners," I interrupted gently. "The decision is final." Thursday morning, I submitted my resignation letter to Bright Hollow Labs. After 25 years, it was time to start my own practice. The Phoenix Housing Project would be my first major client, but the phone hadn't stopped ringing since Monday's announcement. Architecture firms from across the country were calling, wanting to discuss partnerships or licensing agreements for my modular design concept. Kenneth made one final attempt to change my mind, appearing at my office as I packed my personal belongings. "This is a mistake, Eliza. You're throwing away decades of stability for what might be a short-term success." I looked around the office I was leaving behind, then at the man who'd tried to make me feel obsolete. "Kenneth, you told me nobody wanted Grandma's designs anymore. It turns out you were wrong about what people actually want." Claire flew down from Seattle for the weekend to help me set up my new home office. As we arranged my drafting table by the large window overlooking the desert landscape, she asked about my plans. "I'm going to design buildings that last," I told her. "Not just structurally, but in terms of their value to the communities they serve. I'm going to prove that experience and wisdom aren't dated. They're essential." The first phase of the Phoenix Green Housing Initiative broke ground 6 months later. Mayor Thompson invited me to the ceremony, where I watched construction crews laying the foundation for homes that would shelter families for generations. The design that Kenneth had dismissed as outdated was now being studied by urban planners from around the world. As I stood there watching my vision become reality, I realized that sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't proving your critics wrong. It's proving that you were right all along. My journey from dismissed employee to independent architect had taught me that true innovation comes not from chasing trends, but from understanding timeless principles and applying them to contemporary challenges.